Welcome to Feelings and Other F Words. I'm Dr. Daryl Appleton. This week's episode, I have a problem with the research. It's the first time I don't agree with the research, but I'm going to present it to you anyways because I did a deep dive myself with the research. I had AI do a deep dive and it looked at 6,000 different articles of research, and overwhelmingly it said the same thing, but I still don't agree with it, and you don't have to either. But this week's F word is all about fate. Now, there's something that you should know about me. I am literally sitting here, for those of you watching on YouTube, with my tarot cards next to me. So you can probably understand where I'm going to go with this. And I think some people are very surprised to learn that I do my cards every day. And I see a psychic, Just Star, she's been on the show, quarterly for business related stuff. I don't like to ask about Jimmy. I don't like to ask about the girls. It weirdly feels private. So I try to keep it around business and things I should be looking forward to or add or ways to pivot, right? Like I try to use it as data. But it's interesting to me because this conversation really started. The reason why I'm doing this episode and how it got brought up is Jimmy and I, my husband, my loving, adorable husband, and I were having a conversation. And I said something in passing, right? Like, I'm so happy I found my soulmate, and how adorable, right? And he looks at me and he's like, yeah, but I don't believe in soulmates. And after I got done plotting where I would bury his body in the backyard and the next person I would marry for their money, right? Because I married for love already, so why not go for the money this time? Joking, kidding, but maybe not. Then I started to get into this conversation with him, and I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean you don't believe in soulmates? Now, for those of you who don't know, Jimmy's a surgeon. He's incredibly analytical. If he can't feel it or touch it or manipulate it, it's very hard for him to understand it. Although, sidebar, he also very much believes in ghosts, though. He thought our house was haunted, and our psychic came out and had to do a cleansing of our home when we moved into it. It's an old 1800s beach cottage in a very historic area by the sea here in Rhode Island. And Jimmy felt that he was being targeted by these ghosts. It was only targeting him. Which again, I fully believe in ghosts. I spent a lot of time growing up in New Orleans and our house there was incredibly haunted. I've seen some things that just cannot be explained. And while I too am very data driven and scientific, I do have this deep belief that there's just some stuff that you can't actually process or know about or understand. But anyway, long story short, we got into the conversation where this episode came from of, is fate real? Or are we just incredible storytellers and we have made this narrative around loose happenstances and have woven them together to make sense, to make it have meaning? Now, the research that I did was interesting, and I did a deep dive myself. I looked at tons of articles. I read through them all of research and what it said around fate in different aspects, and I'll get into it. But I wanted to start first with my finding on like why we are the way we are, of why are we so obsessed with fate, really? And the reason is it's something called apophenia, and this idea that we see patterns and things that aren't really there. So if you're super stressed out, you're more likely to see 1111 on a passing car license plate or on your microwave clock because you're looking for that sign versus it actually being a sign. Again, I disagree with all of this, but this is what research says. So our brain is looking for ways, because the neuroscience behind it is that it comes from an evolutionary psychology thing, that we are looking for psychological self-soothing, right? When we're anxious, we're looking for reasons why we shouldn't be anxious. But also from an evolutionary standpoint, we also are very deeply engaged in storytelling. It's something that is at the crux of being a human being. I remember I was sitting in a class in college at Stonehill College with my favorite professor, Ann Mattina. Hi, Ann. I adore her. And we were talking about evolutionary psychology, and it was a communications class, and we were talking about traditions and how research showed that if women did not exist, neither would traditions. And specifically women and humans, but we carry stories or traditions down the line to make meaning, to make sense of a world that sometimes doesn't make sense, or an event that cannot be explained. So it is something that I think is very much encoded in us as humans, men, male or female or whatever. But there is something to be said about that. And it's probably the reason why we lean so much into it, right? We want to make sense about a thing. The other thing the research was very strong in pointing out is that we have a deep need for control as people, as humans. I register this, or this registers with me immensely. I have learned about myself that when I get really stressed out, I can actually visually see it by the amount of planners either open at the same time or that I have purchased in a small amount of time. I find that not right or wrong, right? But the more I can write down my to-dos or my schedule or my calendar, the more I have things, quote, under control. I don't. It's perceived control, but we need it. And the perception of control is so much more soothing than the randomness of false control and anxiety that happens, right? Imagine that thinking like nothing I do matters or nothing I do will help. I think it would send us all into a tizzy. And there are people that do feel that way. And you can ask them how they feel about it. It feels a whole bunch of different ways. But really, things like tarots, things like astrology, psychics, manifestation, synchronicity. The research said, not I, Daryl Appleton, but the research said this is just a way to organize chaos. Now, does that mean I stop believing in it? No, sure doesn't. We'll keep doing it every day. But it is interesting to know that. I think the other part of the research that came out that it's important for us to talk about is this idea or this need for a story. Again, that narrative, because beyond it being self-soothing, beyond it passing down traditions, we build identity through the stories that we tell. And there's something about belief systems around fate and synchronicity that directly ties into control, meaning, and social belonging. And if you think about those words, really think about them. Control, we've talked about it. Meaning, right? Deep understanding of self and interpretation of the world around us. And social belonging, how we connect with other people. Oh my God, you're a Leo? I'm a Leo too. I totally understand you. Yeah, don't you hate when, Scorpios do that thing that they do, right? Like there's this like connection and social belonging that comes in shared storytelling. So again, this narrative is super important because it takes it from a random thing that just happened to it happened for a reason. How many of us, if we were in a room together, raise your hand, had a breakup, and somebody, including ourselves, said to us, like, it happened for a reason, right? Because this didn't work out, it led to something so much better, and there was a reason why it didn't work out. That may be true. And again, I believe that it does. I believe in the universe, that it does work itself out because of fate. But science is saying that story there is more to feel better than it is that it's actually true. And it gives us dopamine hits. It gives us these, quote, what they call meaning hits. The brain loves connection, it loves meaning, and it loves anticipation. And I do too. That's my type A. I do too. I really do. Now, where it gets a little spicy, and what I think is also important to have in this conversation, is that you can activate you through your beliefs. And maybe this is really where I kind of land on the research and I actually agree with it. But fate itself doesn't necessarily change you, according to research. But belief in fate can change you, because we can talk about something called a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, self-fulfilling prophecies, I can get all the way behind, because now we're talking again about that storytelling, but more specifically, the stories you tell about yourself. Tons of research on this. But if you grew up in an environment where somebody told you were dumb, you were stupid, you were fat, you were ugly, or maybe you had an abusive relationship, you're never going to find somebody better than me, right? You're going to, at some point, start to believe that and then seek out opportunities that fulfill that narrative. You're never going to go for the job that is a little bit scary but feels like out of your league, or you're never going to try to date a person that potentially doesn't treat you that way. And again, I'm not saying like in totality, I'm saying when you look at self-fulfilling prophecy, people who are actively engaged in it are more likely to stay in that pattern. It takes incredible intentionality and courage to break that system. The opposite is also true. If you're like, yeah, nobody speaks to me that way, I'm all fucking set. If you're like, there's no reason for this not to work out for me, you're going to then seek out those opportunities where you do succeed, where you do have respectful, loving relationships, where you do not settle. And I don't think that's because of fate. I can agree with the research here. I do think that's because of internal narrative and what you have decided for yourself, whether you like it or not. There's also confirmation bias, right? We go looking for the things that support a thing that we have chosen to believe. Like, again, I'm a Leo. Clearly, I already brought it up. So on brand. But I'll look at stuff and be like, yeah, that's so on brand for me. Yes. Oh my God. I light up a room. Clearly. But I tend to ignore the other things of like, I'm selfish or self-centered because I'm like, I don't necessarily think those apply to me. Somebody else hearing me talk or having met me or maybe haven't met me may feel differently about it, but I don't listen to them anyway because I'm a true Leo. But truly, I think there's something, again, that reinforces the storytelling and we seek out confirmation bias on those things. It's hard. But you're not alone. If you're like me, research does show that 3 in 10 Americans consult astrology, tarot cards, or fortune tellers, as they call them, at least yearly. I'm way above that. And about 27% of Americans say that they believe astrology impacts other people's lives, which is growing. Meaning, like, from 2017 till now, that number continues to increase. And I have to imagine it's because the world continues to be that much more on fire and we are lacking external control. So we're looking for internal systems of control in things. Also, if you don't know what synchronicity is, I mentioned it before. This is a Carl Jung. He was a studier of Freud. He coined synchronicity, and it's this idea that if you are acutely aware of your surroundings, you can start to pick up on trends, that's not even the right word, coincidences maybe, that are linked. So Carl Jung, my words, not Carl Jung's words, but he really believed that if you saw a license plate from the state that your best friend is from, and then heard your friends and your song on the radio, and then you met somebody with their same name, like, you should then reach out to your friend. The universe is trying to tell you that. Or if you paid attention to, and they usually come in 3s, by the way, synchronicity. And if you paid attention to the world around you and 3 different things happened, maybe you shouldn't go for that job, or, things like that. Again, I'm broad strokes, people, broad strokes. But synchronicity is fascinating. Look that up. Look up Carl Jung's Red Book. Fascinating. I mean, he wrote it while he was tripping on psychedelics, but it's fascinating. I think there's some stuff in there that's really interesting. But I think that paying attention to your surroundings, like, maybe it can bring some awareness. It can't not. Synchronicity, I'm not so sure. Carl Jung also is the father of dream analysis, which I have an aunt, and I got to get her on the show. She is a psychologist who studies dream analysis, and she had this fascinating story once. Do we have time for an aside? Yeah, we have time. She was telling me this story where she had a patient once that kept having this dream, and this is so weird, kept having this dream that she would go down this long, dark hallway, and every time she would go up and to the right, it was blocked. And it was causing her immense pain to not be able to get through that blockage. But when she went up and to the left in this tunnel, it was clear, but it still didn't feel better. So there's something about this blockage. And there was like way more to it, but this is just what I remember. And I remember my aunt telling me that she was talking about like physical blocks in the body, not mental, but physical blocks in the body. She's like, you should go to your doctor and check out, because you're talking, there were some other like signs that pointed to like human or female reproductive in some way. Because again, dream analysis is like so convoluted, but I love every second of it. And turns out, long story short, Daryl, get to the point. Turns out that this person, this woman, this individual had a tampon stuck up into the right in one of like the fallopian tubes or something up there. I'm not really sure the anatomy of that part of the body, but something was happening up into the right. And it was her body's way of signaling through her unconscious, through dreams, that something wasn't right. Like it, don't like it, take it, leave it, do whatever you want with it, right? Like, I think there's something like that, that maybe it's more than a coincidence. Maybe there's something there. I will say, with my meetings with Jess Starr, my psychic, when I first met her, and I've talked about this before, I think, when I first met her, we had just had a miscarriage. It was right before COVID. I mean, literally like weeks. Maybe she was like probably one of the last people I saw before COVID happened. I think that, yeah. So she didn't know I had a miscarriage, but she picked up on that I had lost a baby. And then she told me I was going to have twins. They were going to be girls. Later on in another reading, we were moving, and she told me that our house would be on like a semi-dead end, which it is. She said that there would be water in the name of the street that we live on, which there is. She described the windows in my home, floor to ceiling windows. She talked about this yard that we have. So again, I didn't show her the listing. I didn't even know the listing existed. So there's so many things like that, you can't explain. You just can't explain. I remember one time I was having a meeting with her, and I was going to a lawyer after to deal with some real estate property that we own. And she said to me in our meeting, she's like, "Are you going to see a lawyer?" And I remember being like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Is his name Robert?" And I was like, "Oh my fucking God, it is Robert. Yes. Again, how would she have known that? I don't know. Maybe coincidence. Maybe the unveiling of, the world between worlds. I don't know. And I'm not so bold enough as to think it doesn't exist. Although the research says that there are no real links between psychics, ESP, or any psi research. They failed to confirm it, which to me is interesting because I do know the CIA has used psychics, yada, yada, yada. Check all that out. But what can we do about it? Let's push this along to our action steps. Hopefully we got a little bit more of a grasp on why we are the way we are. And now let's get into what you can do about it. I do think you can absolutely still use your crystal energy, your tarot cards, your synchronicities, your psychic visits. Like I say go for it. What I do caution everyone about is to not let go and let the universe completely. Like, it still requires your action. You still need to be an active participant in your life. Because I think if we abdicate responsibilities, or if we avoid hard decisions and let the universe take on, you're actually relinquishing what control you potentially might have. So here are the things that I want you maybe to focus on. I want you to do some checklists, right? If you are pulling out tarot cards, or if you do interpret a quote unquote sign, right? I want you to ask yourself these two questions, and they're almost layered. The first question is, what does this sign feel like it's pointing to, right? Because that's also going to you're going to be talking back to yourself. You're going to be talking to your unconscious. Sometimes I'll pull tarot cards and I'm like, I don't like those. And I try to stop and say, okay, well, why not? What's the fear here? Like, what does this feel like? What does this sign feel like it's pointing to? Within me, external to me? And that's helpful in self-awareness. And then the second question, or the second layer, is, what is one action that is fully under my control that I will do in the next 24 hours with this sign, right? And it could be 11 on my microwave. I'm okay. Everything's okay. Like, I'm going to stop worrying about if this bro is going to text me back, or if Jimmy Appleton is ever going to actually meet his soulmate one day, maybe. Who knows? He'll be in the ground, though. Again, kidding for the airwaves. That, I think, is incredibly powerful for those of us who have decided to reject science here and lean more into the things that we're doing with more intention. The other thing that's really great to regain control and to get into that mindset of self-fulfilling prophecy, if you're like, Daryl, I really struggle with that, I want you to kind of focus on a wish. Again, I know science would hate that, but focus on a wish. I want to blank by tomorrow. And then I want you to write down 3 action steps that will bring you closer to that are actually in your control. Like, I was reading something about manifestation the other day, and it's like, you have to act like you already have the money you want, the life you want, the relationship you want, because by acting like you don't have it, you're pushing yourself further from it. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense when we're talking about self-fulfilling prophecy. So what's the first thing you would do if you had $1 million in your bank account? $1 million doesn't get you anything. $100 million in your bank account. Like, what's the first thing that you would do? How would you act if you had that, right? Or what's one thing that you will aggressively cut out doing because that comes from a place of lack rather than a place of abundance, right? Like, what are we doing with that? I can't answer everybody's question, or I can't be available to everybody, because on my vision board, I have peace and tranquility on there, right? Like, I'm never going to get peace or tranquility if I'm constantly available to everybody at every hour of the day. And I think small shifts like that, when used in conjunction, perhaps, science be damned, with some of these tools, my word, not science's word, you might be able to guide your life in a more meaningful direction. And all the things that you're interpreting, right? All the signs you're interpreting, all the tarot, all the information that you're getting from psychics or wherever you're getting your information, astrology, Mercury in retrograde, right? Putting those into action steps to allow yourself to be more fully engaged in building a life that you actually want to occupy. That to me is the real magic. That to me is the real secret sauce behind all of this. Research be damned. Anyway, I hope this was helpful in some capacity, because it was hard. This was a hard episode to do. And I've decided fully that I'm still going to do what I'm going to do with this. But it is interesting to think about maybe some of the dark sides of being too reliant on something or someone else telling us what our fate is, and rather taking these signs as ways to internally gauge and then do something about it that is in our control to have more manifest destiny, if you will. We'll have to get a psychic back on. Maybe Jess will come back on. I have an astrologer that I really want to talk to. I have plans. I have plans. So stick around, stay tuned for our next episode coming soon on feelings and other F words. Write into me if you have ideas or comments or things you want to hear about. You can always DM me, Geriatric Millennial. I'm always in my DMs. Or tune in and we'll talk very soon.